Buying a house and finding a new podcast have a lot more in common than you think. You aren't always in the market for both, and there's a problem if you have too many of either. Can lessons from one inform the other? Hello and welcome to another podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. For years now, there's been a snipe hunt, or a holy grail quest, or a fountain of youth pursuit, I don't know, pick your metaphor, for someone building the YouTube of podcasting, or maybe even the Netflix of podcasting. Well, I'd like to offer a different El Dorado quest for you to consider, the Zillow of podcasting. Now hear me out on this, I know that sounds weird. Before Zillow, buying a house was pretty much fueled by chance or proximity, or took the help of a professional guide. And that means you either saw a sign in the yard as you were driving by, you were flipping through the listings in your local paper, or you called up and used the services of a real estate agent. Now what you couldn't do, and I couldn't do, was access the MLS. That's the multiple listing service. And it connects lots of different private databases together so that the agent you call can show you more offerings, more listings than just the one they have. You, as a buyer, and me as a buyer, back in the day, we had no way to access that database that showed every single house for sale in a given area. So if we wanted everything available in a given area, we couldn't get to it, at least not on our own. Well, Zillow changed all that. Now, anyone with an internet connection can view almost every single property for sale almost anywhere in the entire country. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're planning on going international. All right. What does this have to do with podcasting? I can hear you asking, rightly so. Well, especially in podcasting, we have databases right now that do show almost every single podcast, at least the podcasts that are freely available to anybody. All you have to do is search in an app and a directory. And that's true. But here's the thing. Zillow does more than just show the address of a property for sale. Zillow's service, much to the chagrin of some real estate agents out there, unpacks and exposes data, lots of data, on every property listed in Zillow. And it's that data that help would-be homebuyers make better decisions on which house they actually do want to buy. And that is what I think that a Zillow-like service could bring to podcasting. Because right now, our directories and our apps do little more than just show the address of a podcast property. So what about Podchaser, you're probably saying? Isn't that what they're doing? And sort of, yes, and I'm a big fan of Podchaser, have been since the beginning. And I don't have any insider info of what's going on over there, but maybe they're thinking around the lines of like this anyhow. But I see a new service offering that gives a different set of benefits than what you might be thinking about right now. Here's a couple of them. New podcasts available near you. Well, here, near isn't a physical distance thing. Here, near is what you like to listen to. Because the recommendation engines we have right now in podcasting are pretty rudimentary at best, which is partly why word of mouth continues to reign supreme in podcast discovery. But imagine a system that ingested and analyzed podcasts, all podcasts. Think how that might be much better positioned to make better recommendations than just what's in another subscription list. I see a system that's crunching through all the available data points possible, like, length of the episodes, the tone and the style of that particular episode, the subject, how long it's been. There are dozens, if not more, factors that could be analyzed, someone's listening behavior, and also other people's listening behavior. By atomizing the podcast itself, the whole thing, atomizing the podcast down to disparate points, as opposed to looking at it as one overall show, discovery, specifically pushed discovery, could get a whole lot better than we have today. Or how about an open house, but for podcasts? Now, podcasters don't see it like this, but getting someone to follow or subscribe to your podcast is a really big ask. Is this really the kind of content that the listener wants to hear just by looking at a listing? Is that enough to tell them? Will your episodes be overloaded with commercials and they won't like that? Is the content coming out often enough for that listener? Or maybe is the content coming out too often and they don't have room for it? You know, there are loads of little decisions that make a podcast right for some people and not right for other people. Kinda like a house. So, a well-built service for podcast listeners might let them experience what it's like to, I guess, live in a podcast for a while. And I'm talking about more than just start here guidepost episodes, which I think are a great idea. And also, this is going to be a different level of commitment than subscribing or even just sampling an episode, which for many listeners, it's a hassle to unsubscribe or follow something if it wasn't a perfect fit. Open house for podcasters. Podcast listeners, I should say. Now, that's just two benefits for the listeners, and I think there really are many more. But there are also a slew of challenges to the system. The good news is that all of these data sets that this service would need to ingest and analyze, they're public. But the bad news is that the data sets are public, but they're woefully lacking because we've never really concerned ourselves with anything more than just listing an address of a podcast property. So this isn't something that will be solved in a weekend hackathon project. This requires an investment, probably lots of investments in time and resources to create new complementary data sets. And who's going to pay for that? Right? I mean, heck, which platforms are even going to enable this? I also think a service like this is going to be wading into very treacherous waters. You know, Zillow pissed off a lot of the real estate industry, and it continues to piss off from what I understand. So big networks, powerful podcasters, dominant platforms, they may also see this new service as a threat, which that would need to be mitigated or mollified as much as possible. But I think the biggest hurdle here is going to be listener adoption. Now, Zillow wasn't just used by people, it wasn't just useful to people who wanted to buy a house. It was so vastly better than the other option that people loved it. And it got so much mass adoption that agents didn't really have a choice whether or not they wanted to participate with Zillow. They had to deal with it. I think podcast listeners, they've got plenty of ways of finding podcasts today. The discovery process isn't broken. It's just not great. But again, it's their process. It's their habits. They've got those habits. And those habits of finding podcasts are going to be hard to break if this new offering is only incrementally better. But if this experience is not just better, but orders of magnitude better, well, then the shift is going to happen. People will start using the fantastic product. All right, I know it's another crazy thought experiment from me. What are you going to do? But I think it's important that we think not just of podcasting today, but the way that podcasting might be in the future. With millions of podcasts available today and no signs of stopping, someone is eventually going to build the Zillow of podcasting. And I think listeners are going to love it. With that, I shall be back tomorrow with yet another podcast, Pontifications. Cheers.